Hey friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to press the bell icon like thumbs up, share up right arrow, and subscribe red heart.
Finally, this actualization is actuality cancelled. Those were the words that echoed through Studio 58 aftermost night as Harrison Ford delivered what ability be the most explosive moment in backward actualization history. Before we get into this incredible story, accomplish abiding you hit that subscribe button and be the animadversion beneath because you're not activity to accept what unfolds. What started as a seemingly standard celebrity actualization quickly devolved into television anarchy that had crew associates scrambling and producers frantically signaling from the wings. The restriction was apparent from the moment Ford absolved assimilate the set. Stephen Colbert, belled for his increasingly confrontational account style, seemed determined to advance every button he could find. The adept amateur announcement his latest activity appeared visibly uncomfortable as Colbert launched into what can abandon be declared as an ambush rather than an interview. So Harrison, your actuality announcement edition sequel nobody asked for. Kohler opened with his trademark smirk, absolutely bypassing any pleasantries. Tell me, at what point do you anticipate audiences get annoyed of watching you buzz it in? The studio audience abashed uncomfortably as Ford's expression darkened. This wasn't the playful badinage admirers had appeared to expect. This was article far more sinister. Ford, advancement his composure admitting the obvious provocation, responded with measured restraint. Well, Stephen, I think audiences acknowledge authenticity, something that seems to be in short supply these days. The attenuate dig wasn't lost on anyone, atomic of all Colbert, whose jaw visibly tightened. The host leaned back in his chair. That familiar predatory beam in his eyes that regular viewers apperceive all too well. Authenticity. That's affluent advancing from addition who's been benumbed on the aforementioned three characters for 40 years. Core attack back, his articulation decrepit with disdain. Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and grumpy old man. Which one are you arena tonight? The audience's afraid amusement couldn't mask the growing abhorrence radiating from the account desk. Ford's legendary air-conditioned began assuming cracks as he leaned advanced slightly. You know, Stephen, I've been accomplishing interviews longer than you've been in show business. I've sat above from professionals who accept the difference amid amusement and harassment. The words afraid in the air like a challenge, and anybody in the studio knew they had aloof witnessed the first real attack accursed in what was about to become an complete war. Colbert's response was abrupt and merciless. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I aching the animosity of the man who capital his own character killed off because he was annoyed of pretending to affliction about the fans? The reference to Ford's well-documented frustration with the brilliant Wars franchise was a low blow, and the actor's face flushed with anger. Maybe if you put half as abundant accomplishment into your performances as you do into your complaints, we wouldn't be sitting here watching you badly try to stay relevant. The flat fell silent, except for the afflictive alive of audience associates who were alpha to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. Ford's calmly absorbed the accoutrements of his chair as he candied what had aloof been said to him on civic television. This wasn't the antic baking that celebrities about active up for. This was appearance assassination disguised as entertainment. Stay relevant. Ford's articulation agitated a dangerous bend that fabricated several crew members' barter afraid glances. I was making movies aback you were still figuring out how to apprehend cards without moving your lips. The aberration between us, Stephen, is that I've acceptable my place in this industry through decades of work. Not by ambuscade abaft a board making cheap shots at bodies who actually create article meaningful. Core's laugh was acrid and mocking. Meaningful? You beggarly like Crystal Skull? Or how about that adversity cowboys and aliens? Face it, Harrison. Your yesterday's news desperately adhering to accomplished glory. The host was acutely adequate himself, feeding off the ache he was creating. At Atomic Aback I Bomb, I don't take in complete authorization bottomward with me. The claimed attributes of the attacks was becoming absurd to ignore. Ford had endured decades of interviews, faced down difficult journalists and hostile critics, but this acquainted different. This felt affected and atrocious in a way that transcended able disagreement and entered the branch of authentic malice. You apperceive what your botheration is, Stephen? Ford's articulation grew quieter, more controlled, which somehow fabricated it more menacing. You've abashed animality with cleverness. You anticipate disturbing people down makes you important, but all it does is acknowledge how baby you absolutely are. The words addled home, and for a brief moment, Colbert's affectation slipped, revealing article animal underneath. But rather than abetment down, the host doubled bottomward on his aggression. Small. I'm not the one who looks like he'd rather be anywhere abroad every time someone puts a camera on him. Tell me, Harrison, aback absolutely did you accord up caring about your craft? Was it after the third Indiana Jones movie, or did it take until Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for you to absolutely buzz it in? The systematic annihilation of Ford's career and acceptability was aching to watch. Audience associates began attractive around nervously, some affairs out their phones to abduction what was acutely acceptable a historic television moment. The actor's legendary accord was actuality activated in ways no arranger could accept prepared him for. Ford sat aback in his chair, a look of abhorrence overextension above his weathered features. This is absolutely what I'm talking about. This isn't entertainment, Stephen. This isn't even journalism. This is aloof you getting your bliss by actuality atrocious to bodies who can't action a back afterwards attractive like the bad guy. His articulation agitated the weight of addition who had assuredly seen enough. Can't action back? Colbert leaned forward aggressively. You're Harrison Ford. You've got added money and influence than I'll anytime have. If you can't handle a few questions, maybe you should stick to movies' breadth. They can edit out your personality. The cruelty was acceptable added Arendt with each exchange, and it was bright that something irreversible was building between these two men. The atmosphere in the flat had abashed from uncomfortable to absolutely tense. Security cadre abashed afterpiece to the stage area, and producers in the control room were aimlessly debating whether to cut to commercial. Ford's jaw was set in a way that anyone who had watched his movies would recognize. This was a man reaching his breaking point. A few questions. Ford's beam was Absathian and cold. Is that what you alarm this character assassination masquerading as comedy? You know, I came actuality to talk about my work, not to be your personal punching bag for whatever issues you're working through. The able facade was crumbling, complete the genuine anger underneath. What happened next would change everything, and the tremor in Colbert's articulation appropriate he knew he had pushed too far. But instead of backing down, Core fabricated the fatal mistake of acceleration bottomward on his aggression. You perceive what, Harrison? Maybe the complete botheration isn't the questions I'm asking. Maybe the real problem is that you can't handle the truth about your career. The host's voice took on an audacious affection that made anybody in the flat w'er. You're sitting actuality acting like some wounded legend. But the absoluteness is, you've been coasting for decades on the amicableness of fans who still bethink aback you actually gave a damn. Ford's eyes flashed with article dangerous. The careful accord he'd maintained throughout his career was finally cracking beneath the adamant assault. The accurateness about my career. You appetite to talk about truth? His articulation rose slightly, aloof abundant to accomplish the audience authority their aggregate breath. The accurateness is, I've spent 40 years creating characters that beggarly something to people. Characters that affect them, that accomplish them except in something bigger than themselves. What except you created, Stephen? What's your legacy going to be besides authoritative people uncomfortable for bargain laughs? The personal attributes of Ford's counterattack clearly addled a nerve. Colbert's face wrined as he accomplished his bedfellow was no longer arena defense. My legacy. I've built a career on captivation people accountable, on allurement the questions that charge to be asked. Aloof because you don't like audition them doesn't mean they shouldn't be asked. Accountable? Ford's beam was aciculate and humorless. Is that what you alarm this ambush? Because from breadth I'm sitting, it looks like you arrive me actuality aloof so you could take shots at me on civic television. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's just blowing with bigger lighting. The word blowing afraid in the air like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. Core's complete address shifted. His trademark beam replaced by something much uglier. Bullying? You anticipate this is bullying? Try actuality a amateur who has to watch overpaid actors accuse about how adamantine their lives are while they collect $1 million paychecks for reading Curve Edition abroad wrote. Ford leaned forward, his acclaimed acuteness now fully focused on his tormentor. "You know what I think, Stephen? I anticipate you're jealous. I anticipate you're sitting there behind that board night afterwards night watching complete artists actualize something lasting while you're ashore authoritative jokes about whatever is trending on Twitter. Must be exhausting. Constantly chasing relevance like that." The claimed attack hit its mark. Colbert's composure cracked visibly as he attacked back with venom. "Jealous of what? Your wooden performances. Your complete disability to show any effect above balmy annoyance. At atomic aback I fail, I abort honestly. I don't adumbrate abaft characters created by other bodies and pretend I'm some kind of artist." The flat admirers was now completely silent, analysis that they were witnessing article that would be talked about for years. Crew members stood arctic at their posts, torn between their able duties and their accessible admiration to arbitrate in what had become a acutely personal confrontation amid two men who clearly abhorred anniversary other. Ford's voice abandoned to a buzz that somehow carried added annoyance than shouting ever could. "You appetite to see emotion, Stephen? You appetite to see article real?" He paused, absolution the astriction body before delivering his abutting words with surgical precision. "I feel apologetic for you. I genuinely feel apologetic for Edition who's so captivated with disturbing others down that they abandoned what it agency to build article up." The benevolence in Ford's voice was added adverse than any insult could accept been. Kohler visibly recoiled as if he'd been slapped. "Don't you cartel sit there and patronize me. You don't apperceive annihilation about me or what I've built." "I apperceive enough," Ford replied coldly. "I apperceive that in 30 years, people will still be watching my movies, still finding acceptation in the characters I've brought to life. What will they remember about this show? Your cruelty? Your desperate charge to accomplish anybody else feel as afflicted as you acutely are?" Cause affectation assuredly slipped completely, revealing the bitter, affronted man underneath the backward knight persona. You sanctimonious allotment of he bent himself before commutual the profanity, but the damage was done. The appearance of professional amenity had been completely bare away. Ford stood up abruptly, his armchair abrading adjoined the studio attic with a complete that seemed to echo through the aback bashful space. "That's enough. I've sat actuality and let you take your shots, but I'm done actuality your punching bag." His articulation agitated a finality that fabricated anybody in the studio apprehend this account was about to end in amazing fashion. "Sit down, Harrison. We're not done here," Kohler demanded, his host authority completely debilitated by the desperation creeping into his voice. "Oh, we're done," Ford replied with baleful calm. "We've been done aback the moment you decided to ambuscade me instead of having an complete conversation." He began removing his microphone. Anniversary movement deliberate and final. "You apperceive what the real tragedy is here, Stephen? You had an opportunity to accept a meaningful conversation with Edition who's been in this business for decades. Instead, you chose to be petty and cruel." The host made one aftermost atrocious attack to regain ascendancy of the situation. "You can't aloof airing out in the average of a live show. This is unprofessional." Ford paused in removing his microphone, fixing Colbert with a beam that had intimidated endless admiral and co-stars over the years. "Unprofessional? You appetite to allocution about unprofessional?" His articulation rose aloof abundant to ensure every chat would be heard acutely by the studio admirers and millions of viewers at home. "Amateurish is inviting someone assimilate your actualization beneath false pretenses. Amateurish is application your platform to barrage claimed attacks instead of accepting complete conversations." The restriction in the flat had accomplished a breaking point. Admirers' associates were now above board recording with their phones, sensing that they were witnessing television history in the making. Producers in the Ascendancy Allowance were frantically debating whether to cut to commercial, but the raw ball unfolding was too acute to interrupt. Colbert made one final atrocious ball for control. "Fine, airing away. Run back to your bivouac like the prima donna everyone knows you are. This is absolutely what I'm talking about. You can't handle any real criticism." Ford completed the abatement of his microphone and set it bottomward on the interview board with advised care. When he looked up at Colbert, his expression independent decades of accumulated acumen and disappointment. Criticism. Is that what you alarm this character assassination? Complete criticism comes from a abode of compassionate and respect. This he gestured about the studio with accessible disgust. This is just chicken debris advised to make you feel bigger about your own inadequacies. The final insult landed with devastating precision. Colbert's face went through a range of emotions: shock, rage, and something that ability except been shame before clearing into a affectation of cold fury. Get out. Aloof, get out of my studio. Ford smiled grimly, the expression complete no warmth whatsoever. Gladly. But before I go, I want anybody watching to know something. He angry hardly against the cameras, acclamation the audience directly for the Aboriginal time. This show isn't actuality annulled because of ratings or money. The words beatifica arctic through the flat as anybody accomplished what was about to be revealed. Ford's voice carried the weight of complete authority as he continued, his boring never leaving Colbert's added afraid face. This actualization is actuality annulled because of how you amusement people. Because the network assuredly accomplished that cruelty isn't ball and that antibacterial people for ball isn't what television should be about. The adumbration hit the studio like a thunderbolt. Colbert's face went anemic as he accomplished his guest had aloof apparent what was acutely meant to be arcane information. You don't apperceive what you're talking about. He stammered, but his articulation lacked conviction. The atrocious bend to his denial abandoned accepted what Ford had just revealed. Don't I? Ford's smile was cold and knowing. You anticipate Hollywood is a big place, Stephen, but it's actually quite small. Chat gets about a host develops her acceptability for ambushing guests, for authoritative interviews so uncomfortable that publicists start warning their admirers away. You think I'm the Aboriginal actuality to airing assimilate this set and apprehend I've been set up? The audience was blind on every word, sensing they were witnessing not just the end of an interview, but potentially the end of an era. Camera operators continued filming, admitting frantic gestures from producers, knowing instinctively that this was television gold that couldn't be interrupted. Colbert fabricated an atrocious attack to regain ascendancy of the narrative. This is ridiculous. You're authoritative things up because you can't handle a tough interview. The actualization isn't going anywhere. Ford's beam was genuinely amused for the Aboriginal time all evening. A tough interview? Is that what you're calling this hit job? I've done tough interviews, Stephen. I've sat bottom-ward with journalists who asked challenging questions about my work, my choices, my craft. That's what professionals do. His voice accustomed again. This isn't journalism. This is aloof, you alive out your claimed issues on a live television. The host was now visibly sweating, his carefully complete persona crumbling in complete time. You're delusional if you think. What I think, Ford interrupted with adverse finality, is that you've abashed actuality beggarly with being funny for so connected that you've forgotten the difference. You've congenital your entire late-night career on authoritative people uncomfortable, and now you're shocked that it's assuredly communicable up with you. The accurateness in Ford's words was undeniable, and anybody in the studio could feel it. Crew associates were nodding almost imperceptibly, their faces reflecting years of witnessing similar ambushes from their positions abaft the cameras. This wasn't aloof about one bad interview. This was about an arrangement of behavior that had allegedly finally reached its breaking point. Colbert made one aftermost atrocious play, his voice rising to abreast shouting levels. You can't aloof appear on my actualization and destroy everything I've built. This is my studio, my audience. You're what? Ford's voice cut through Colbert's beef like a blade. You're victims. Because that's all we are to you, isn't it? Aloof people you can breach bottom-ward to accomplish yourself feel important. He gestured against the stunned audience. Attending around, Stephen. Look at their faces. These bodies didn't come actuality to watch you ache someone. They came actuality to be entertained, maybe to apprentice something. Instead, they got to watch you acknowledge absolutely who you really are. The camera briefly panned across the audience, capturing expressions of shock, disappointment, and uncomfortable recognition. These weren't the faces of people adequate themselves. These were the faces of bodies who had just witnessed article acutely unpleasant and were aggravating to action what it meant. Ford angry aback to Colbert with something that ability except been benevolence in his eyes. You apperceive what the absolutely sad part is? You're absolutely talented. You could accept congenital article meaningful here, created conversations that mattered. Instead, you chose to be cruel because it was easier than actuality good. The claimed attributes of the critique seemed to hit Kohler harder than any of the antecedent insults. His shoulders sagged hardly as the action went out of him, replaced by article that looked suspiciously like shame. You don't understand the pressure. I understand pressure, Ford replied quietly. I've been ambidextrous with it for 40 years. The difference is I never acclimated that pressure as an alibi to aching bodies who couldn't fight back. He paused, absolution the words sink in. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You aces on bodies when they're trapped in this chair. Aback they can't avert themselves afterwards looking like the bad guy. The psychological insight was adverse in its accuracy. Colbert's complete account appearance had been congenital on base the inherent power alterity amid host and guest, using his position to barrage attacks that guests couldn't appropriately acknowledge to without actualization brusque or difficult. Ford began walking against the edge of the set. Anniversary footfall deliberate and final. I've been in this business long abundant to admit a annoyer aback I see one. Even the abandoned difference between you and the amphitheater bullies I grew up with is that you've got better writers and a bigger audience. Wait, Colbert alleged out, agony bright in his voice. You can't aloof leave like this. We can alpha over. Do this properly. Ford paused at the bend of the stage, not axis around, but letting his articulation backpack back to the host and the audience. Alpha over with what? The respect you've already destroyed. The professional address you've already abandoned. He did about face then, fixing Colbert with one aftermost look. Some things can't be undone, Stephen. Some bridges once austere can't be rebuilt. The finality in Ford's articulation labored no room for altercation or negotiation. Colbert sat frozen in his chair, acutely clumsy to process that his bedfellow was actually walking abroad on a live television. The studio admirers watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's biggest stars able to avenue the stage. You know what I accomplished sitting here tonight? Ford continued, his voice carrying calmly through the silent studio. This actualization isn't absolutely about entertainment or advice or even comedy. It's about agriculture your ego at other people's expense, and I'm done being aliment for that accurate beast. With that adverse final assessment, Ford absolved off the date with the dignity and attendance that had fabricated him a movie star. The cameras followed him until he abolished into the wings, leaving abaft a flat abounding of stunned people and one absolutely devastated. Host. Kaur sat abandoned at his desk. The weight of what had aloof happened settling over him like a shroud. The audience remained silent, borderline how to react to what they had witnessed. This wasn't the affectionate of ball they had active up for. This was something much barrage and added uncomfortable. The silence continued on for what acquainted like an eon afore Colbert finally managed to speak, his articulation almost above a whisper. We'll be appropriate aback after these messages. But anybody in the studio knew there would be no coming back from this. The accident had been done. The accurateness had been revealed. And Harrison Ford had aloof delivered the most adverse appraisal of backward night television anyone had anytime witnessed. As the flat lights dimmed and the audience filed out in uncomfortable silence, it was bright that they had witnessed article historic. The moment when one of Hollywood's best respected actors assuredly said, "Enough was enough." Ford's departing words about the show's abandoning afraid in the air like a prophecy. And anticipation by Colbert's haunted expression, it was a prophecy that was about to appear true. The confrontation was over, but its impact would echo through the entertainment industry for years to come. Ford had absolved out with his dignity intact, while Colbert was left to face the aftereffects of his cruelty. In the end, the adept amateur had proven that sometimes the best able thing you can do is artlessly debris to participate in addition else's ugliness. The backward actualization had aloof accomplished its most affecting moment ever, and it might very able-bodied accept been its.
Thank you for watching my video.